Assalamu alaikum. So inshallah, I'm also going to be reading a poem, and as I mentioned the first 2 nights, by the grace of Allah, I'm a published author and a published poet, and the very first book that I wrote and that I published was a book called A Unique Elegy, Standing Upright, and it's a Karbala Muqta. As a poet and as an English speaker, I wasn't really able to connect to the Latmiya and to the Nohas of Urdu or Farsi. And my Arabic dialect is very different from the traditional dialects of the Arabic Latmiya. So I had difficulty connecting with the lamentations in Muharram. So I decided, as a poet, to try to do my best effort to write something that I could connect with, and hopefully other English speakers can experience the tragedy and understand and to connect with, inshallah. So in this book, there are several sections, but this portion of the reading comes from the chapter of the companions. So this is after the background has started, and this is after the battle has been initiated. For those of you who don't know, the battle was started by Omar Rashed. He was the first one to send arrows onto the camp of Imam Hussein. And one of the things that Imam Hussein did not want to do was start the fight. It was possible for Imam Hussein 3 or 4 days earlier, before the people had been drenched in thirst, to initiate the attack against a smaller force. But Imam Hussein said, we will not be the first ones to initiate the fight. We won't start this battle. So this portion is after the battle has begun and companions are now engaged in combat. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. I beg you, O Allah, O rememberer of rememberers, to remember those who remember prayer steadfast, like Abu Thumama, who wished to return to his Lord, having performed his noon prayer before its time passed. I ask you, O Allah, the judge, to judge between people, good and evil. The Imam requested a break for prayers. Bin Tamim said, your prayers are not accepted. Libel. Habib exclaimed, your prayers are accepted, but not the Prophet's progeny, you donkey? Bin Tamim charged. Habib struck him, so he fell. Habib fought hard, killing 62 men valiantly. He was struck on the head, lanced, and thrown down, until Bin Sarim beheaded him, boasting. Bin Tamim hung his head from his horse and galloped around Bin Saad's ranks, gloating. Hur and Zuhair fought foes together as one. When one needed help, the other was at his side. Until Yazid's army attacked Hur surrounded. He was martyred then and there and died with pride. I pray to you, O Allah, O answerer of prayers, to accept the prayers offered in distress. Like the prayer of Khawf, the Imam led, Sa'id's body protected, pierced by arrows relentless. I beg you, O Allah, the numberer of all, to count us among Imam Hussein's supporters. Verily, you count his companions better, and of their stories are the best of recorders. I ask you, O Allah, the giver of honor, to honor us with greatness of character, as you honored the companions of Al-Hussein, with strength, will, and service of our Master. So I complain to you, my Lord, on the loss of true believers dear. Oh, how their tragic deaths weigh down on our hearts severe. Our souls wrenched in agony from the intense pain they felt. How can we feel relief when they were slaughtered by the debased? Our sore eyes are not soothed, as their fatal wounds were not tended. We cry to remember their dignity from their Imam and the principles they defended. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin, hudan lil muttaqin, Abul Qasim Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I greet you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So tonight's lecture or speech has been titled Living Islam Every Day. And I came up with a byline. And you might think it's cheesy, you might think it's corny, but I think it's kind of fun. It's squeezing all of the juice out of the religion. So if you imagine when you're making freshly squeezed orange juice, it's such a precious thing that you have in your hand, and you want to squeeze every drop, and you don't want to lose any of it, because it's so precious, it's so delicious, it's so sweet. So there are techniques, I don't know if you know this, when you're juicing a lemon or juicing an orange, if you roll it and you put pressure on it on the table before you cut it open, it'll get all the juice out, so you don't lose any of it. And I think that one of the things that we need to consider about our religion is taking all of the juice for what it has to offer. Because you can do just a drop or two, but it's so much more fulfilling when you have all of the juice that the fruit has to offer. So, in order to squeeze all the juice out, you have to know and believe that there is juice. Sometimes we go through life imagining that Islam is something that we do, that we have to do, it's an obligation, it's a requirement, it's a burden, it's things that we have to do because our parents told us to or because somebody told us to. And we don't necessarily believe that there is benefit in practicing Islam the way that it's been revealed, and that there is benefit for us in this world as well as the next one. And we also have to know what the juice is. I'm going to define what it means to have the juice, but I just want to start here that you have to know what is the juice in order to get it. Now, all deeds are judged by their intention, and our intention in life is always supposed to be the pleasure of Allah. And the pleasure of Allah is a function of deriving the juice from the religion. And the juice is the true meaning and philosophy of the action that we do, not the action itself. I'll say that one more time. The juice, the meaning, the depth of our religion is in the meaning and the philosophy of the actions that we do for Allah. The actions, the meaning and the philosophy of what we do, not the action itself. Allah's pleasure is not a function of the act, but our recognition of the true meaning of what we're doing. Allah doesn't need us or whatever we're doing. Allah is inviting us and rewarding us for drawing ourselves closer to Him and His knowledge and His appreciation, and that's why He rewards us. Because we're getting to know the depth and the truth of the true meaning behind our actions. Again, all deeds are judged by their intention. So if you don't know why you're doing your action, it takes away from the value of the action. And He doesn't need our actions anyway. Those actions that He enjoins upon us are for us. But He loves and values that we derive the true meaning and benefit from our actions. Now, I want to repeat something that I mentioned yesterday, was that there was a hadith Qudsi in which Allah says, I desired to be known, so I created a creation that could know me. Then I created mankind, and then I taught him about myself. Then he came to know me. Then they came to know me. This principle that Allah wants to be known is so integral to our lives that all of our deeds can be done, and ideally will be done, with the recognition of Him and the recognition of why we're doing what we're doing for Him. Now I want to share a story. Over century, this is the history of the world actually. This has happened in every generation, in every civilization, from Adam until Imam al-Mahdi. The people were oppressed and they cried out for help. They cried out for help. Oh Allah, save us. We're being oppressed. There are dictators on top of us. There's oppression. There's evil. We're struggling. We need help. God, please save me. And God heard, and God answered. Allah sent messengers with guidance and with a book. And then what did the people do? Anybody know what the people did? They rejected the messengers. They killed the messengers. They called them liars. They called them sorcerers. They called them madmen. They said that you're no better than we are. What gives you the right to be ruling over us? The people were struggling. The people were suffering. They asked Allah for help. And when Allah sent the help, they rejected it. Ironically enough, that's the story of Karbala, isn't it? Imam Hussein was called. They asked him in Kufa, please come save us. Then they turned their swords on him and killed him. This is not a new story. This is a very old story of people asking for help and when the help comes, rejecting it. And I want to talk a little bit about this history, and then I'm going to go back to our situation, because we're not in that situation. But I want to talk a little bit about following our fathers blindly. Now, I had an exercise. I used to teach in a Sunday school years ago. And I had an exercise where I had my students look in the Quran and search in a particular translation, the Shahar translation, for the word fathers. And look at every verse in the Quran in which the word fathers is in the translation. And I'm just going to read to you 3 of them. And you tell me if you notice a pattern. And when it is said to them, follow what Allah has revealed, they say, nay, we follow what we found our fathers upon. What? And though their fathers had no sense at all, nor did they follow the right way? It's the first verse. And when it is said to them, come to what Allah has revealed and to the apostle, they say that on which we found our fathers is sufficient for us. What? Even though their fathers knew nothing and did not follow the right way? And the third verse. And when they commit an indecency, they say, we found our fathers doing this, and Allah has enjoined it upon us. Say, surely Allah does not enjoin indecency. Do you say against Allah what you do not know? If you'll notice the pattern here, Allah does not seem to be speaking very favorably of following our fathers, and especially following our fathers blindly. Now I have a question for you. I want you guys to participate a little bit tonight. Raise your hand if you were raised into a Muslim family. Raise your hand if you weren't raised in a Muslim family. Thank you. Not everyone is born into a Muslim family. Does that verse and that principle only apply to people who aren't raised Muslim? The Quran is for all people for all time. All people have to recognize that they cannot follow their fathers blindly. And there are consequences if they do. We'll get to that sometime later. But we all have an obligation to examine the truth for ourselves. It's not just, oh, I was born into a Muslim family, so that part of the job is done, now I can move forward. No, you have to examine and be conscious in why you do what you do and why you believe what you believe. It is not okay to follow blindly, not for Muslims, not for Shia, not for Christians, not for Jews, and not for atheists. Now, I want to share an interesting principle in taqleed. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with taqleed, the idea of following a marja, following a scholar for the legal rulings of how to do things like pray and fast and whatever. There's something called taqleed, which is emulation, following a scholar because you don't have the knowledge. You're not a doctor in jurisprudence, you haven't mastered the Arabic language, all that other stuff. So you follow a scholar who derives these rules so that you know how to live your life, right? And you know how to interact in certain circumstances. At the beginning of every risala from every marja, it's the same no matter what scholar you follow, they give you a principle that says you are not allowed to do taqleed in the usul. The usul ad-din are the 5 beliefs that make us Muslim. Well, the 3 beliefs that make us Muslim and the 5 beliefs that make us Shia. The 3 beliefs that make us Muslim are Nubuwah, prophethood, Qiyamah, the day of judgment, and Tawheed, the oneness of Allah. The oneness of Allah is actually first, but Tawheed, Nubuwah, Qiyamah. Prophethood is what all Muslims believe in. The oneness of Allah, and the day of judgment, resurrection, that we will be held to account for our deeds. The 2 additional ideas that make you a Shia are imama and adal. The justice of Allah is adala, and imama is the imamat, the institution of the divine representatives after the Prophet, peace be upon him. These usul, you cannot do taqleed. You can't follow a scholar in these 5 beliefs. You have to come to it on your own, through your own research, through your own investigation, through your own understanding. If you don't, now, I'm not a mujtahid, so I'm not going to say what happens if you don't. But I'd like to suggest that possibly your deeds will not be accepted. Possibly. I'm not an authority, so I can't say that. But I do know that you are not allowed to do taqleed. You're not allowed to follow someone else in those 5 beliefs. You have to come to them on your own accord. So if you're born into a Muslim family, or if you're not born into a Muslim family, and you follow somebody just because they're telling you, just because they tell you that you should, or they compel you, that's not acceptable. We have to come to that understanding on our own. Now, I mentioned that some people killed the prophets when Allah sent the guidance. Some people didn't. Even if they didn't kill the prophets, these people followed the outward wrapper and actions of the guidance without the spirit, the juice. They did the outward actions, but they didn't follow the principles, the true meaning, the philosophy, the understanding, the benefit. And I want to start with one of our beliefs, which is that everything, and this is actually an interesting topic because there's not consensus between the schools of thought on this particular point. Some Muslims believe that everything that we do simply because Allah commanded us to do it. So the reason we don't eat pork is because God said don't. There's no benefit in it. There's no wisdom in it. We do it because God said no. And some people take that for all of the Islamic rulings. Some people, the path of Ahlul Bayt believes that not only do we do what Allah says because He said it, that is true, but that's not the only truth. We also follow every ruling. We believe that Allah has only prohibited things that are harmful for us, and He's only made mandatory things that are beneficial for us. These 5 ideas of mustahab, wajib, mubah, makruh, and haram, forbidden, disliked, neutral, encouraged, and required. These 5 rules that everything that we do is based on are there for us because they're for our benefit. Allah is not just requiring things out of the blue. So for example, why does Allah require prayer? You can say, oh, well, we have to pray because God told us to pray. No, Allah knows there's a benefit for us praying. And it's up to us to figure out what that benefit is. It's not necessarily up to the scholar to tell us. That's not the job of a jurist. Our job is to find out the benefit for us and to experience the benefit. That's the juice. That's the true meaning and the philosophy of what we're doing. Everything we do in life for the sake of Islam has a benefit. But we have to understand that benefit. We have to invest the time, energy, and effort to experience that benefit. Because imagine you're going to the gym, and actually I'll give an example from martial arts. So I'm a martial artist. And they have something called kata, which are established forms. So you basically do certain poses, and you go through the motions. And it's a very ritual thing, and you sort of do it in a certain way, in a certain order. But some people, they do it like this. Like if I'm supposed to be punching, they'll punch like this. Anybody think this looks like a real punch? Tell me. I need to hear something. No. No. Okay. Now what about that? Is that a real punch? All right. You notice the difference, right? If you do the kata and you're doing this, you're playing. You're having fun. You're not doing anything real. But if when you're doing the kata, you throw a punch, you're actually doing the proper activity with the proper purpose, with the proper meaning. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. When we do every ritual in Islam, there's a purpose. When we do everything that we do in life, there's a purpose and a significance of why Allah has asked us to do it. And it's up to us to figure out what that is and to do it for the right reasons and to throw a real punch and not one of these. We have deluded ourselves into believing that the practices of rituals with or without understanding the meaning and philosophy of them, is valuable and acceptable to Allah. But that's a fallacy. Allah does not accept that. The truth of the matter is all of the real value of our rituals derives from the meaning and the philosophy of the ritual, why we're doing it, what Allah intends for us to grow and develop as human beings. That's what counts, not the ritual itself. That's what our intention is connected to, and that's what the pleasure of Allah is connected to. Now, I've sort of got a laundry list of du'as and hadith and Quranic verses, but I'm gonna go through some of them and then talk a little bit about each. So the merit of understanding. So you might be saying, well, what's the proof? Why would you say that understanding is so important? So there's a hadith of Rasulullah that says, O Ali, the sleep of the scholar is better than the worship of the worshipper. The sleep of the scholar is better than the worship of the worshipper. Now, I like sleeping. I don't know about you guys, but I would sometimes rather sleep than pray. But the sleep of a scholar, someone who understands the value and the meaning of their acts and their deeds and their worship, is worth more than somebody who just stays up all night and prays, but doesn't know why they're doing it. This is also a hadith of Rasulullah, the best form of worship is to contemplate about God and His power. The best form of worship is to contemplate. Contemplate. That's not something that comes up in our majalis very often, contemplation. That's not something that we talk about amongst ourselves, the values of contemplation. But the Prophet tells us that the best form of worship is to contemplate about God and His power. A hadith of also Rasulullah, he says, the contemplation of an hour is better than a year's worship. And in other narrations, an hour's contemplation is better than 60 years of worship or 70 years of worship. 1 hour. This speech is an hour. 1 hour of contemplation is worth 70 years of worship. That's an entire lifetime for some people. Can you imagine that every single prayer that you do every day for the rest of your life is equal in value to Allah for 1 hour of contemplation? Doesn't that encourage us to want to contemplate more? Are we understanding the juice? Do you guys see what I'm saying by the juice? Are you getting it? Now, a hadith of Imam Muhammad Baqir. In the eyes of God, the virtue of knowledge is more favorable than worship. And a small amount of knowledge is better than much worship. So these are all, and there's more. There's countless hadiths, so there's countless verses. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the demerits of ignorance. How bad Allah considers ignorance. So the first verse that I'd like to share with you is chapter 39, ayah 9. And it says, say, are those who know equal to those who do not know? Only those who possess intellect take admonition. Obviously, Allah is saying that those who don't know are not worth as much as those who do. Not worth in their soul, but valuable and esteemed by Allah and honored by Allah. There's another hadith, knowledge is the root of all good, and ignorance is the root of all bad. If you don't understand the meaning and the philosophy of your actions, you can't possibly have proper intention. So you lose the value of the deeds. Two people can do the same deed and get opposite results from Allah based on what they brought with that action. And I want to bring two very different examples. Now let me ask a question. How many of you, raise your hand if you believe that prayer is a good thing. Raise your hand if you believe prayer is a bad thing. I'd like that. I'm liking this. Nobody raises their hand that prayer is a bad thing. Did we know that in the Quran Allah says that prayer is a bad thing? Are you surprised? Surah Al-Ma'un, chapter number 107, verses 4 until 7. It's a very short surah. So woe to the praying ones. What? Woe to the praying ones? Here I am waking up for Fajr and Allah is sending woe on me? Woe to the praying ones who are unmindful of their prayers, who do good to be seen and withhold the necessities of life. If you're praying and you're doing it to show off, Allah says woe to you. If you're praying and you're unmindful in your prayer and you're not paying attention to the meaning of what you're reciting beautiful Arabic doesn't help if you don't know what you're reciting. You have to learn the translation of what you're reciting in whatever language you speak. You need to know what you're saying. Who are unmindful of their prayers and who do good to be seen. That means that you're doing those deeds for the pleasure of other people and for your own status, not for the pleasure of Allah. And for those who withhold the necessities of life. People who pray, but when somebody asks them for help, they turn away. So Allah is very clearly talking about people who are praying and they're getting a bad end result. Now, I'm sure that you're remembering this one too. There's also Allah talking about the benefits of prayer. So in Surah Mu'minun, chapter 23, ayahs 1, 2, and then I skip a few and go to 9 through 11. Okay? Successful indeed are the believers who are humble in their prayers, and those who keep a guard on their prayers. These are they who are the heirs, who shall inherit the paradise. They shall abide therein. Now, do you notice Allah is saying the exact opposite? In one case, people who pray are being threatened with destruction, and in one case, people who pray are being inheritors of paradise. But why? There's one word that should come to your mind, and it comes from an orange. What's that word? Juice. Thank you. The juice. The meaning, the significance, the philosophy of what we're doing in our prayer. That's what makes the difference. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you doing? Who are you serving? Who are you thinking about? Who are you giving your devotion to? And why are you doing that which you're doing? What is the true meaning and the significance of our actions? Okay. Now, the verses that were recited at the beginning, thank you, Brother Komeya, for reciting the first 11 verses of Surah Al-Mulk. That's one of my favorite chapters. And he recited the first 11, and the 10th verse, the one right before last, is the one that I wanted to emphasize here. And just to give, and you guys heard the translation. So obviously these were people who were threatened with hell, and fire was getting very hot, and people were being thrown in. And then the angels asked these people, did not a warner come to you? Didn't somebody tell you? No. And they said, yes, a warner did come to us, but we called them a liar, we rejected them. We didn't, and we said God didn't send anything. And then this is the verse, and this is a different translation from the one he read, but it's the same concept. They will further say, had we but listened or used our intelligence, we should not now be among the companions of the blazing fire. Allah is telling us what to think about the philosophy, about the meaning of what are we doing and why are we doing it. Now, I want to share an experience with you from my Hajj. So alhamdulillah, I was blessed this year to be able to go for the Hajj. And there was an experience in which, and so I want to set a little bit of the background for those of you who are not familiar. In the Hajj, after a certain period, you do 3 days of stoning. So you might have heard of the stoning of the big shaitan. So there are 3 pillars. A small one, a big one, a middle one, and a big one. And they're actually all the same size, but they represent the small shaitan, the medium shaitan, and the big shaitan. And the idea is, in the story, when you know the story of Ibrahim. Ibrahim, he was asked to sacrifice his son. He saw it in a dream. He asks his son, what should I do? What do you say? He says, oh, my father, do what you're commanded, and you will indeed, hopefully, God willing, you will find me to be among the patient. And so 3 different Satans, shaitans, attack each of the 3 characters. One of them attacks Ibrahim and says, how could you sacrifice your son? You're an old man, you've been waiting all your life for a child, you've been wanting a child so badly, you finally got one and now you're going to sacrifice him? Maybe God didn't actually tell you to do it. Maybe it was just a dream. Don't do it. And he says, no, no, no. And that's the idea of throwing the stones at the shaitan, at the big shaitan. And then there's the middle shaitan, which is the mother of Ismail, saying, how could you let Ibrahim sacrifice your son? He's your son. Don't let him do it. And again, she throws she disagrees and rejects what shaitan is saying and agrees with her husband. And so she allows him to do what he needs to do. And again, that's the throwing of the stones. And then, of course, Ismail, Shaitan comes to Ismail and says, why would you let him do that? And don't let him do that. You're such a young and innocent boy. Please don't let him do this. And he says no. And he rejects the call of Satan, of Shaitan. And that's the small Shaitan. But in this process, that is the historical meaning of what happened. But there's a contemporary meaning when you're doing the stoning. And this actually comes from a book, well, this understanding comes from a book. I highly recommend it. Anybody who's going for Hajj, do not go to Hajj without reading this book first. It will change your life. And the people who I've seen who haven't read this book have had very less suboptimal experiences compared to those who read it. It's called The Hajj by Ali Shariat. It's a gem. And I'm going to be reading a passage of it. But before that, part of the meaning of the stoning, when we are doing it as the Hujjaj, is to think about what are those shaitans that you're throwing the stone at? You know, we're throwing a stone at a shaitan, right? Is it an enemy, an external enemy that we're trying to beat? You're not going to beat that wall. The stone is not stronger than that wall. It's been there for years. What we're actually doing is throwing that stone at our internal character defects, our internal weaknesses, our internal beliefs that are keeping us away from Allah, our internal habits that keep us away from Allah, our thoughts, our habits, our beliefs about God, our beliefs about people, our sins, our whatever it is that's stopping us and keeping us from Allah. So in this context, I was in the Hajj. I was there, a few weeks ago, and I asked one of the people that I was at Hajj with, what are the traits you're thinking of when you're throwing each stone? And they replied, what do you mean? And I said, well, each stone is not being thrown at an external enemy, but it's thrown at one of our personal traits, behaviors, beliefs, doubts, habits, that keeps us away from Allah. Each stone we throw is our intention to overcome and remove that personal defect and ask Allah to purify it, asking for His support. And this person had never heard that before. They were dumbfounded. You know what they told me? They said, oh my God, I feel like I want to do the entire Jamarat all over again. This means so much more now. This was the third day. This was the last day of the Jamarat, the last day of the stoning. And the first 2 days were already done. And they lost the opportunity. They lost the opportunity. They lost the benefit from those first 2 days. But you know what I told them? I said, don't worry. You have 21 stones ahead of you. Make the most of each one. It's never too late. Make the most of what you have. When you know better, do better. Right? Isn't that the saying that we all hear? When you know better, do better. Don't blame yourself for what you didn't know. Don't chastise yourself for all the mistakes you made. When you know better, do better. Now, that particular person had gone and talked to all of their friends and said, oh my God, you guys need to talk to Omar about what's going on with the Jamarat and what the meaning is. It means so much more. And nobody really picked up on that. By that time, we were already finishing up. Everybody was done. We were leaving and we were done. We were going for the Eid. Everything was done. But no one else talked to me, but for that one Hamla member, Hamla is the Hajj group, sorry. For that one Hamla member, they got the juice. And that's what they benefited from the most. Life is more enjoyable when you have the juice, when you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. It means more. It helps you. It shapes you. You grow. Because without the juice, again, there's nothing here. There's no purpose. There's no benefit. And Allah is not accepting. Well, I can't say Allah's not accepting. He's not accepting it as much as He would as if you had the juice. Now I want to read to you, this is from the Hajj. And this is a poem by Nasir Khosrow in that book I told you about by Ali Shariati called The Hajj. It says, the pilgrims returned with reverence. They were thankful to the merciful God. On their way to Mecca from Arafah, they repeatedly said Labbaika with great respect. While tired of experiencing the hardships of the desert, they rejoiced that they are saved from the torture and the fire. They have performed the Hajj and completed the Umrah. Now they safely return to their homelands. I took time to go and welcome them back, although men of my class did not normally do this. But among the crowd of this caravan, I had a dear and very sincere friend. I asked him how he accomplished this very difficult and fearful trip. I informed him that since he had departed and left me alone, all I could feel was regret and sadness. Now I'm happy that you've performed the Hajj, and you are the only Hajji in our homeland. Now, tell me, how was your performance? How did you respect that holy territory? When you were about to remove your clothes and wear the ihram, what was your intention during those exciting moments? Did you absolutely avoid all the things that must be avoided and whatever is inferior to Almighty Allah? He replied, no. I asked him if he said labbaika with full knowledge and great respect, if he heard the command of Allah, or if he obeyed as Ibrahim did. He replied, no. I asked him, while he was in Arafah, while he stood so close to Almighty God, did he have a chance to know him? Was he not eager to learn a bit of the knowledge? He replied, no. I asked him, when he entered the Kaaba, as the family of Kahf and Raqim had done, did he deny his self-centeredness? Did he fear the punishment of the hereafter? He replied, no. I asked him, when he shot the idols, did he think of them as evil? Did he then avoid wrong deeds? He replied, no. I asked him, when he offered the sacrifice to feed a hungry person or an orphan, did he first think of Allah, and did he then kill his own selfishness? He replied, no. I asked him, when he stood in Ibrahim's position, did he rely absolutely on God, sincerely and with strong faith? He said, no. I asked him during his sa'i, while he was running between Safa and Marwa, was he sanctified and purified? He said, no. And then the man says, of whatever you have asked me so far, I have understood nothing. I said, oh friend, you have not performed the Hajj, and you have not obeyed God. You went to the Mecca and visited the Kaaba. You spent your money to buy the hardships of the desert. If you decide to go to Hajj again, try to perform it as I have instructed you. I want you to just pause with that for a moment. This entire poem is encapsulated in a hadith of one of the Imams. I have the Arabic of it, but I don't have a translation, otherwise I would have read that. But this poem follows the pattern of that hadith. But I want to ask you, is Hajj any different from the rest of life? Don't we pray 5 times a day? Don't we fast the month of Ramadan? Don't we give zakat? Don't we give khums? Don't we do all of these things? Don't we avoid haram meat? Don't we avoid alcohol and pig and all this other stuff? Don't all of these actions that we do for God have some juice? Don't they have a deeper philosophy and a meaning? Are we getting the juice out of what we're doing? And I repeat the closing line. You went to Mecca and visited the Kaaba. You spent your money to buy the hardships of the desert. Oh friend, you have not performed the Hajj and you have not obeyed God. So what about us? What about us? This hadith also comes from Rasulullah. How many persons fast and get nothing out of their fasting except hunger and thirst? And how many persons pray at night and get nothing out of it except sleeplessness? From Alama Tabatabai, every creation has a fitrah that reaches perfection. So, since we're talking about oranges, an orange starts as a seed, it grows, it sprouts, becomes a full tree, it bears fruits. The fruits at the beginning are unripened, they're very small and immature, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they get riper and riper and riper, and then they get sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. And then if you leave them on the tree for too long, they get old and bitter, and they get spoiled, and then they fall from the tree and they rot on the ground, right? That's the life cycle of the tree. That's the life cycle of the orange. That's its fitrah, and that is its perfection, going from the beginning of its life until the end of its life. Humans also have a fitrah, and our development in reaching perfection is in increasing our knowledge and understanding. That's what our course of life is. That's why Allah put us here. Now, you may be wondering about quote-unquote less smart people. You may think not everyone is smart enough to get more understanding and knowledge of the depths of Islam. Not everybody, most of us in this room are college educated, very advanced in our careers. What about everybody else? What about the people in the village? What about those kinds of things? Not everybody's qualified. Not everybody's able to do this. That's not accurate for two reasons. Number one, Islamic meanings are simple and they're accessible. So for example, God is one. Simple. We should dedicate the whole of our lives to Allah. Simple. We should offer the best we have to Allah. Simple. Cain and Abel are a perfect example. You know, the first two sons of Adam. One of them gave an offering that was rejected. Cain gave an offering, but he gave the worst of what he had. The worst of his stock, the worst of his fruits. That's what he gave to Allah. And Abel gave the best of his livestock, who was a shepherd, and he gave the best of his animals as a sacrifice to Allah. And Allah rejected one and accepted one. Aren't we the same? Are we giving the best of what we have to Allah, or are we giving the sloppy seconds, as it were? These concepts are not difficult. That's the first part. But and I want to, on this point, I want to give an example. And actually, I was looking for the hadith. I wasn't able to find the story, but I'll just share the story. So the Prophet asked a woman, "What is your understanding of Allah?" The woman was using a spinning wheel or a loom or some sort of sewing instrument to make some clothing. And she said, "Do you see the spinning wheel? Without me running this wheel, no clothing would be made. Without Allah running this universe, the universe would not work." And the Prophet responded, "This is perfect tawheed." This is a common woman. She's just sewing. She's not an advanced person. She's not got a PhD in molecular biology. It's not her field. But she understood, I have to run my sewing machine, and God has to run this entire universe. There has to be a creator who did this and who is doing this. Again, it doesn't require a rocket scientist. Now, I want to give another point to this, that different people have different capacities, and Allah knows what we're capable of. He accepts whatever we offer as long as we offer the best, our best. So you might have somebody who has mental issues. You might have somebody who's literally not a very intelligent person, but they can strive the best that they can to get to know Allah and Allah accept. And there are people who are molecular biologists, astrophysicists, and they're atheists. They use all of that intellect for what? For destruction. What's the difference? Allah doesn't judge you based on what ability He gave you. He asks you to use whatever ability He gave you in His way. And He judges you according to your capacity, not according to other people's capacity. So I want to give a detour, an example of squeezing out the juice. In Muharram, this was I think in 2015, there Hassanin, so I was living in Baton Rouge at that time in Louisiana, and at our masjid, our Shia masjid, there was, it was like a house actually, somebody's house that we would meet in, and they had a big projector, and we didn't have a scholar, so they would play a Hassanin Rajabali lecture from another season. And they played this particular one on the 11th night of Muharram. So this is after, it's called the night of Ghuraba, the night of strangers, in which, and orphans, all of the Ahlul Bayt had become orphans. All of the male relatives were dead, and all of the children were orphaned. And he was drawing an example that all of the Ahlul Bayt were orphans, and today we have so many orphans in Iraq as a result of the American invasion. We have so many orphans in Afghanistan and all of these other countries where there's bombing constantly. There are many orphans, and we should have compassion for those orphans, just like we should have compassion for the orphans of Ahlul Bayt. And as I was watching that I really, for whatever reason, that year, it really connected with me. And I cried out my heart and my soul on that night. It really hit me hard. And it was one of the first times that I literally bawled in a Muharram majlis. But one of the things that came to my mind was, even today, alhamdulillah, my father and my mother are still alive. I'm not an orphan. But I should take the time that I have now and repair the relationship and improve the relationship with my parents. Because there's going to be a time I'm going to be an orphan. One day, I'm going to have not the ability to ask them about their families, about their history, about my ancestry. I'm not going to be able to ask them. And with my kids, I'm going to want to give them all of that story about where they came from and what they're. But if I don't ask today, I might not get a chance. I should ask my parents while they're still alive. I should improve my relationship with my family, with my parents, while I'm still not yet an orphan. And it really resonated with me. And actually, that night, I called my father, and we'd had a falling out a couple of seasons ago, and we made amends, and now we're actually very close. But I want to say that that's the idea of squeezing the juice out of something. When you see something, when you hear something, apply it to your life, use it, grow from it. Because these are not just ideas that you go in one ear and out the other. It's to help us to change the way that we live and improve the way that we live. We all have, and I want to share this point with you. We all have the power. We all have the power and ability and skill to examine the Islamic sources. We're not all going to be mujtahids. We're not all going to be fuqaha. We're not going to make jurisprudence rulings. But we have the ability to look up the Quran, to read the Quran, in whatever language we understand, to read the hadith, and to apply it to our lives. We have that ability, we have that right, and we have that obligation. But if, for example, you might not be an expert in everything, but you're an expert in something. So actually I'm going to ask, anybody here in the room a pharmacist? Cool. All right, awesome. So you can read the verses on the body in the Quran, and you can apply your knowledge of the human body and how pharmaceuticals work. You can apply your expertise to the Quran the way that you have it. Any scientists? Raise your hands. Scientist is a very broad field. Come on. Okay. You can look at the verses on nature, the verses of creation, the verses of... There's so many verses in the Quran and in the hadith literature and in Nahj al-Balagha and everything else that talk about your field. They're there. Are there any teachers in the room? I'm old. Any other teachers? Yeah, teacher. You can look at the verses on education, because there are verses on education. How do you, one of my favorite verses is, repel evil with that which is better, then you will change the one who is your enemy into your loving friend. What is that other than education? And again, are any psychologists, therapists? Yeah, wrong audience. Anyway, the verses on the soul. Every one of us can take our expertise to the Quran and explore the Islamic sources with our knowledge and wisdom and insight. And I do not have to be the only one up here speaking. Any one of you could be speaking up here. Why not? You have the ability to read. You have the ability to look at the sources. You can look it up just as much as I can. There's nothing that I can do that you can't do. But do we? And I'm going to just remember that there are all these great scholars in history. Al-Jibr, Ibn Haytham, Rumi, Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, Mullah Sadra, Imam Bakr al-Sadr, Shahid Mutahari. All of these scholars, all throughout the ages, were not trained in a hawza. They didn't go to school to be scholars. Realize that. None of them went to school to be a scholar. They learned from the scholars in their area, and they did their own research, and they provided a legacy of amazing things. And I just want to point out Ibn Haytham. He's the one who, I think there was somebody who was the most important figure in the last 1,000 years. They did this in 1999. And they said it was Ibn Haytham because he invented the scientific method in like 1200 something or 1100 something. And he was one of the students of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. Something along those lines. It was in the last millennia. I don't remember when Ibn Haytham was alive. But he invented the scientific method, and he was a student of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. So, fun facts. Okay. Do you know what these great scholars were? They were everyday people who invested their time in their profession and their pursuit of knowledge of Allah. That's it. They weren't epic, they weren't special, they weren't miracles, they weren't geniuses. Well, they were geniuses, but they weren't special. They were just people who dedicated their hearts to Islam and to their knowledge. And we can all do that. Just like you and me, if you want to be. Now, I want to give a brief detour. There was a couple, an engineer and a lawyer, who divorced. The families lamented and they said, they're so good in their profession, why couldn't they make their marriage work? They spent 12 years of primary school, 8 years of college learning their profession. How much did they learn how to be in a healthy relationship? It's a question. The same is true of Islam. How much do we invest in this religion? You may want to consider it, for this is what Allah will ask us all about on the Day of Judgment. Not your cars, houses, spouses, degrees, title, or power, but how much you invested in knowing Him and His religion. And so there's a verse in the Quran in which it says, therefore do remind, surely reminding does profit. And there are two other small examples that I wanted to give, which apparently aren't in my notes. But there was a time when we're talking about capacity. We all have different capacities, but sometimes, even if someone's capacity isn't very great, we can accept it as good. So I'll tell you the story. So I have, like I mentioned before, now I have a very healthy relationship with my father. But my father had some challenges in his life, some drama, some suffering that he was never really able to get over. His father died when he was 12 years old, and he always used to tell us growing up, you know, Omar, I could die tomorrow, I could die tomorrow, I could die tomorrow, don't wait. I could die tomorrow. Use me while you have me, connect with me now. But I believe, honestly, that he never really got over that. But he has somewhat of a limited capacity to give meaningful, helpful advice, life advice. I mean, he's a brilliant man, but in different ways. But when I was a child, so I'm diabetic, just FYI, and so I'm not supposed to be eating sugar. And one of the things that I told my dad when I was like 6 or 7 visiting him was that, you know, Dad, I really want some sugar and some candy. He's like, Omar, sure, here, have it. And I'm thinking to myself, awesome, right? Yes. But that's like not in my best interest. That's probably not good for me. But he told me, Omar, I wanted you to be happy while you were in my presence, rather than doing. And he didn't really believe in diabetes. He didn't really believe in Western. I don't know how to explain it. But he said it wasn't a big deal for me to be eating sweets. It really was a big deal for me to be eating sweets. But he let me do it anyway. But although it wasn't probably the best thing to do, it was coming from a place of love. It was the best that he could offer. And I could accept it. I can choose to accept it or to reject it. But we have the ability to choose, to accept the gifts that people give, and to accept the works that others around us offer. So that's one example. And there's another example. My dad always used to tell me, Omar, you should be a computer person. You should go and learn how to design, go into computer science and build computers. I said, Dad, I don't want to do that. I want to save the world. I want to be a social justice advocate. I want to be a social worker. I want to do this. I want to do that. He said, no, Omar. You're going to make a lot of good money if you be a computer person. You're really good with computers. And it wasn't what I needed to hear. It wasn't the most helpful advice. But what he was doing was giving the best that he had to offer me, which was thinking about my financial security and thinking about my life and thinking about it from his perspective. So even though it wasn't beneficial, even though it wasn't the advice that I needed to hear, I could accept it for what it was. He was doing the best that he could. And so I was talking to a friend the other day, and I was telling him about children. You know, so a lot of times children will scribble, right? They'll draw a little picture for you, and they'll hand it to you, and they say, here, uncle, here, dad, this is my picture. Here, mom, this is my picture for you. And it's like, and yeah, we've all got kids in our life, or we've been kids, right? You've drawn a picture for your mom. I'm sure you have. And you give it, and the mom is like, I've got a million of these, and like it's not really that way. But they accept it with love because it's the best that that child could offer. They gave them the best that they had. And in the grand scheme of things, each and every one of us is a child scribbling on pieces of paper, asking Allah to accept. All of us, even Prophet Muhammad, even Imam Ali, it's just scribbles. If you think about the majesty of Allah and the majesty of His creation in this universe and every other universe, and all of the oceans and the mountains and all of this stuff, this is just scribbles. But Allah accepts it from us because of the sincerity with which we draw. All of our efforts are scribbles. We don't know whether, and this is continuing from yesterday, we don't know the results of our actions. That's on Allah, not on us. But we do the best that we can and Allah rewards us for it. And that's what we're called to do. To really connect and do the best that we can with whatever we're offered. So we are in this universe, scribbling away, trying to ask for acceptance of our paltry deeds. But the reality is Allah accepts it. And I was talking to a friend earlier today, and he said Allah is the one who inspires us to do good. And then when we choose to do the good, He rewards us for it and gives us more. And that's our Lord in all of our lives. Over and over and over again, He gives us abundance in all these ways. So now, after that, I have a few practical tips. And then we're going to close up on this. I don't know how long this is. So, practical tips. So the first one. There are so many good ideas. Transfer the ideas from your brain to the heart. Anybody know how to do that? Taking the ideas from the brain to the heart and making them real? There's only one word you have to do, and it's practice. Do it. Just like Nike, just do it. Right? When you practice the wisdom, when you practice a good idea, it will translate from the mind, which you probably should be being kind to people. You probably should be doing this. But if you actually do it, it will enter your heart. And you'll be able to actually get the significance out of it. So what have we been talking about? The juice, right? So try it. Actually go and try to get some of the juice. If you actually do it, you will be able to transfer that from a good idea in your brain into a part of your life that continues and flows and becomes a pillar of your life. But there's only one way you can do it is by doing it. And I think there was a quote of, I want to say Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson. No, it's actually Aristotle who said it. A person is what he repeatedly does. Virtue, therefore, is a habit, not an action or something like that. You are what you habitually do, what your habits are. So focus on actually practicing. When you have a good idea and you hear a good idea, you say, yeah, I should probably do this. Don't wait, just do it. Nike, just do it. Okay, so I actually have homework for you guys right now. Like seriously, here's practical tip number 2. You've got 3 tasks. Make the intention right now. Right now. Number 1, make the intention now and take 3 actions today. One of them before you leave this majlis, one of them before you go to sleep tonight, and one of them book the time in your calendar. Nobody does anything, as I've learned, if it's not in your calendar. If you respect it, and if it's important to you, it'll end up in your calendar. Put some time to invest in understanding the juice, or doing good deeds, or doing whatever it is that we're talking about. Pick your battle. You know your life better than I do. I don't. But you know what you need to be doing. Take a time and schedule it in your calendar. Make a time for Allah. Make a time to get connected. Okay. So I have a few ideas. Okay. Next point is about virtue with a purpose versus virtue without a purpose. And this is sort of ties in with the whole thing that we've been talking about so far. Virtue with a purpose is when you do good knowing why you're doing it, and for the benefit and the pleasure of Allah, and you'll be rewarded for it. But there are people who give charity, and it's unfortunate that they're doing it because they don't have Allah's pleasure in heart. And so will they be rewarded by Allah for it? No, they'll get the benefit of it in this world, but not in the next. So make sure virtue with a purpose, virtue without a purpose. All right, so that's, okay. So living Islam every day is done when we all get all of the juice out of our actions. So that's where we leave off. And I hope that that has been helpful. Now, there was a group of people who most definitely got all of the juice out of every action that they did. And there are no greater examples than Abu Thumama and Sa'id ibn Abdullah. Those were the two companions I mentioned in my poem at the beginning. Abu Thumama was the companion who asked Imam al-Hussein, is it not time for prayer? In the middle of the battle, arrows flying left and right, horses trampling over people and bodies, swords clashing, he remembered Allah, and he remembered the time for prayer. That's living Islam every day. That's getting the juice out of every action that we do. And Sa'id ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi, when the prayer of Khawf had started and Imam al-Hussein was leading the Jama'ah, the archers were showering them in arrows. And Sa'id lived his Islam every day by standing in front of Imam al-Hussein and using his body as a shield, taking each and every one of those arrows. I do not know who Sa'id ibn Abdullah or Abu Thumama were before the day of Ashura, but evidence is clear as to who they were by their actions on the 10th of Muharram. When Abu Thumama noticed the intensity of the war, he said to Hussein, "O Abu Abdullah, may my soul be sacrificed for you. These peoples are beginning to approach you, and by God I will not let them harm you, unless I am killed protecting you, God willing. I would love to meet my Lord, having performed prayers whose time has commenced." Hussein lifted his head up and said, "You remembered the prayer. May God include you among those who offer prayer and remembers Him. Yes, it is now the preferred time of prayer. Ask them to stop attacking us until we have offered prayers." But they refused. Then Hussein prayed with them the prayer of fear. Sa'id ibn Abdullah was guarding Hussein and tried to shield him from the arrows. His body was pierced by numerous arrows, protecting our Imam from the enemies of Allah, the enemies of Islam, the enemies of Rasulullah, and the worst enemies among mankind. Sa'id fell down as a result of the arrow wounds and was martyred on the blood-stained sands of Karbala on the 10th of Muharram. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّمْ مُنْقَلِبٌ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. And they who act unjustly shall know to what final place of turning they shall turn back. وَلَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الظَّالِمِينَ. Now surely the curse of Allah is on the unjust. Not 100%.
Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein. Nishan paaj paygambar सजाया जाता है, निशान ताज पैगंबर सजाया जाता है, निशान ताज سجایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے۔ حرم میں گھیرے ہوئے ہیں نبی کے آل سبھی، حرم میں گھیرے ہوئے ہیں نبی کے آل سبھی، اب ہو تو آنکھوں سے پرچم لگایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے۔ خدا کرے کہ وہ خیمے میں کامیاب آئے، خدا کرے کہ وہ خیمے میں کامیاب آئے، بڑی امید سے پردہ اٹھایا جاتا ہے، بڑی امید سے پردہ اٹھایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے۔ علی کا چاند علی کا نشان کیا کہنا، علی کا چاند علی کا نشان کیا کہنا، تمام دشت بلا کا لگایا جاتا ہے، تمام دشت بلا کا لگایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے۔ حرم میں گھیرے ہوئے ہیں نبی کے آل سبھی، حرم میں گھیرے ہوئے ہیں نبی کے آل سبھی، ابھی تو آنکھوں سے پرچم لگایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے، نشان فوج پیمبر سجایا جاتا ہے۔ یا حسین 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 یا حسین، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات روتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات روتی ہے، نکل کے روتا ہے دن چھپ کے رات روتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات 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 روتی ہے، تو اس طرح سے لٹا کربلا میں ابن علی، تو اس طرح سے لٹا کربلا میں ابن علی، تیری غریب پہ کل کائنات روتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے 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 کائنات روتی ہے، حسین لائے ہیں قلب حسن کے لاشے کو، حسین لائے ہیں قلب حسن کے لاشے کو، دلہن کو دیکھ کے ساری بارات روتی ہے، دلہن کو دیکھ کے ساری بارات روتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات روتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات روتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات روتی ہے، ملا نہ پانی تجھے فاطمہ کے لاتے جگر، ملا نہ پانی تجھے فاطمہ کے لاتے جگر، تو تیری پیاس کنہر فرات ہوتی ہے، جو تیری پیاس کنہر فرات ہوتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات روتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات روتی ہے، تو اس طرح سے لٹا کربلا میں ابن علی، تو اس طرح سے لٹا کربلا میں ابن علی، تیری غریب پہ کل کائنات روتی ہے، تیری غریب پہ کل کائنات روتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات روتی ہے، حسین غم میں تیرے کائنات روتی ہے، نکل کے روتا ہے دن چھپ کے رات روتی ہے، نکل کے روتا ہے دن چھپ کے رات روتی ہے، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، یا حسین یا حسین، وہ عابد بیمار تھا، وہ عابد بیمار تھا، چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا، چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا، اور شام کا بازار تھا، اور شام کا بازار تھا، اور مصطفیٰ کی بیٹیاں، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی، شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی، سینے پہ جو شاک کلی، سینے پہ جو شاک کلی، جس کی ہوا بننے چلی، جس کی ہوا بننے چلی، منہ پہ کما جو تھے نشان، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، وہ اصغر بے شیر تھا، وہ اصغر بے شیر تھا، اور حرملا کا تیر تھا، اور حرملا کا تیر تھا، پیاسا گلا کیوں کٹکٹا، پیاسا گلا کیوں کٹکٹا، روئی زمین اور آسمان، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، وہ زینب و کلثوم تھی، وہ زینب و کلثوم تھی، چادر سے جو محروم تھی، چادر سے جو محروم تھی، نامحرموں کے درمیان، نامحرموں کے درمیان، اور مرتضیٰ کی بیٹیاں، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین، یا حسین 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 Hussein, 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 Hussein. اللهم صل على محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء، السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك يا علي المرتضى، السلام عليك يا حسن المصطفى، السلام عليك يا حسين الشهيد وابن الشهيد، السلام عليك يا علي زين العابدين، السلام عليك يا محمد الباقر، السلام عليك يا جعفر الصادق، السلام عليك يا موسى الكاظم، السلام عليك يا علي الرضا، السلام عليك يا محمد التقي، السلام عليك يا علي النقي، السلام عليك يا حسن العسكري ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليك يا مولاي يا ساهم الأزل والزمان، الأمان الأمان الأمان، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، أجل الله تعالى فرجا وسخر الله مخرجا وظهور العام جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Just a couple announcements before we finish up. So this is the last program in our 4-part series of Muharram in Boston. From here on out, for the last 6 nights, we're going to be helping shuttle people out to the center.